talking about. And as I was discussing with a couple of you at breakfast time, there's a lot of complexity, a lot of experience behind what we're talking about in this workshop. And every country has a different experience, and every country has a different degree of sophistication in how much they develop their systems. So yes, we're all having quite an effort, I think, in absorbing huge amounts of ideas and information. But as I said to my colleagues this morning at breakfast, if when you go back to your desks and you're buried in your daily work, every now and again, perhaps once a month, once every 2 months, you have a flash. You say, wait a minute, I can see the problem here. This is what David was discussing back in Orochi, and you can see it with a different pair of eyes. If that happens once, twice, 3 times, we've been successful. That's the idea, is to be able to give you a different perspective, capacity, and a way to look at the issues that you're struggling with every day. So let's talk about another. Let's talk about what happens in trying to implement a results framework across government when government activity is decentralized. We've discussed a couple of times how governments often tend to want to centralise, and some of the scripts we had in the country presentations the last couple of days have shown how the country has built fairly much central control systems, and a lot of countries I've worked with, they have strong central control systems, central financial management. Why do they do that? It's because that's how they retain control. But government is too big in almost any country. Government is too big, too complex, too geographically spread out to serve the people in certain circumstances. So it has been a natural state for governments to spread their capacity to deliver programs, deliver their policies away from the centre. What decentralisation does is that it gives responsibility to either separate agencies or separate governments to administer programs that might be their own, that might be the programs of the central government. The only country I can think of which is probably small enough that doesn't have to be centralised very much would be Singapore. But think of it others that everybody has quite, even if they're not very big geographically, they might have quite they might have quite distinct regional populations and regional issues. So governments do decentralise, and there are different ways that lots of different ways actually, that decentralisation takes place. Three are mentioned on this slide. One is the obvious one that we are involved in today, and we don't really think of it as decentralisation, but it is. It's decentralisation within a national government. So decentralisation there is to pass responsibilities out. It was upside down. It is to pass the decentralisation within government, of course, is to pass out the responsibilities for program delivery to specialised ministries. Now, interestingly, well, let me go through the three, then I'll come back to that one. Once to pass out to ministries or agencies within government, and you're all familiar with that. I don't know any government that operates completely out of one structured entity like a great big central department. A form of external decentralisation is where program responsibility is passed to another level of government, and that's a very common model. We'll talk about that somewhat more in a few minutes. China has one of the most elaborate delivery of government programs is contracted up to private agents, non-profit organisations, or even for-profit organisations. That's a whole issue of public administration itself, and I won't be talking about that anymore. So what we're going to be talking about are decentralising within government and decentralising between levels of government. This slide is taken from a paper from the OECD, and I thought it really captured some important observations because it was based on a study of a few countries. I thought it had some authority. And what Sugila is saying in this slide is that where countries decentralise their operations, he observed three requirements he thought were really important. And think about each of these, they're quite interesting how he's broken them up. One is that you have to preserve financial discipline. So that implies really that when you pass things out from the centre, you lose financial discipline. Now, what does losing financial discipline mean? It could mean that some national governments are allowed to borrow and cause the country to have significant public debt. But it could also mean that the money sent out to the decentralised units to deliver programs just isn't being used properly. The intent of the central government is lost because the people that give the money to it aren't going to cost that required. So preserve financial discipline. The second one really picks on that point. Ensure that the funds are spent in accordance with the program design. That second requirement is right on the topic we're talking about in this workshop. How do you preserve that results focus? And a results focus that is becomes the results the central government wants. And the third requirement is that when you do decentralise, you start to give autonomy and flexibility to people in decentralised units to be able to implement their programs. And that is this word says allow, demands that there is fiscal humanity and accountability. Going to give autonomy and flexibility to a ministry or to a subnational government, and you want them to implement programs that are consistent with the central government's requirements. Then there must be high accountability both for their fiscal outcomes and for the management of those programs. They seem sort of obvious, don't they? But they're really demanding. And in a way, it's a nice little summary of the things that central operational government has to keep their eye on when programs are decentralised. Have you ever thought about why a bureaucracy, we're all getting involved in bureaucracy, you are involved in bureaucracy, why they're designed very structured, vertical silos, as the word is often used in English, and how it translates to other languages. But there's a great criticism of government because it becomes very siloed. Everything's in vertical structures, and they don't communicate across structures very well. Why does government organise itself in that sort of way? Because it ensures tight accountability. It means that authority passes straight down from the top, down to the lower managers. Responsibility can pass down from the boss to the subordinate, one after another. And the process of control and accountability move back up through that silo. It's a very nice way of making sure you get very tight governance. It's just a very inflexible way of being able to implement complex programs. So as soon as you start to decentralise, you start to weaken those lines of good governance, good processes of government. It's actually a phenomenon of government today, and you must all be feeling the pressure that we are being encouraged, even pushed by the demands on government, by the complexity of our programs, to start using other agencies, outside agencies, other levels of government. We're pushing these out all the time, and we have to. So the nature of government has changed. It's in the process of changing to become much more horizontal, thinking across organisations. So these issues of decentralisation have become very common in the way government is run these days. That slide, you can just stare at it at home to entertain yourselves. They're the four components of the financial governance So what we need to do is we've created a system now by Decentralized where we have separate authority. The health ministry adds up to the Director General of the Ministry of Health. And the other ministries have their own. Subnational governments have their own ministers, their own cabinet, their own parliament probably. So they have a different line of authority. Authority being either legal authority, but it's not only legal. Legal authority would come from the laws enacted by the parliament, say the central government or subnational governments. But there's also political authority, which is very strong. It goes alongside legal authority. And therefore ministries, even though they're under one legal structure, ministries of a government can have their own ministers providing authoritative instructions to that ministry, which may not be exactly the same as the ones that will come from central government. So the point is we're having multiple lines of authority in government. How do you make sure that they are properly connected and brought together to achieve a common purpose? The results framework we've been talking about through this week has to be able to pick up all those different lines of authority. It can't just be something here at the centre and written in a book and hope it will work. And of course, especially with where there are separate governments involved, subnational governments, those governments might well have their own agendas, their own political needs they want to put in place, their own strategic goals. That's okay. They will always have those strategic goals, provided they are not in conflict with the strategic goals of central government, and provided that as well as their own local goals, they're able to incorporate and give priority to the national goals that are set out in a plan and the authority transmitted from the central government. That's much easier said than it is done. So every part of this now rather complex process of government devoted up by decentralising has to know where they, just as we talked about yesterday, that manages down to the ministry and understand where they fit in contributing to the national plan. So too to separate ministries, separate governments, whoever else is involved or into the process of British government activity. Okay, now we're going to talk about the two major types of decentralisation within national governments and between different levels of government. So let's start with decentralisation within national government. This is very common. The government's structured with ministries, but interestingly it's not going on. And some of the countries here might already observe some differences. There are two sorts of effects that we see. I mentioned one of them yesterday, that small countries that are still in an early stage of development, not as sophisticated information systems or government systems or bureaucratic systems, tend to control things in the centre. They have got the skills or the information systems out in the region or in their central ministries. But as they become more developed and they get systems from outside to put in place systems, they develop skills, they build their capacities, they start to push more control authority out from the ministry. I can see this happening in the Pacific Island countries. Some of them that are more sophisticated are actively trying to push the capacity to run programs out to their line ministries and out to their various islands. But of course, they're doing it with a lot of strings attached, trying to keep information flowing and trying to keep accountability processes. They're nervous about it, but it is a process of development. It's actually usually a one-way activity. The government starts centralised, but they develop sophisticated systems, they start to spread their activities out further, give more autonomy to agencies away from the centre. There's actually another aspect about decentralising government, and Professor Alan Schick has spoken to this workshop at the time. He's written very, very good paper on it. It's that Australia, we have a mixture. We have ministries and agencies. And every now and again we change bring agencies back to ministries, or we push units out from ministries back to agencies. We never quite find the right model. The point about different models is some have more direct political control of others. The ministry has much more control. If you want a program to be delivered in a way that has more sensitivity to the clients, it's more competitive out there in the marketplace, you might want to action with the minister. Have less ministerial control, but of course, then you can be sure that you're getting the right results. That's the challenge. If you bring it back into underneath the minister, perhaps it just becomes a bureaucratic exercise much more than an incentive service exercise. But there are different models of decentralising, even within a one government. And different models bring up quite different problems about how to ensure that you're getting the desired results, that all those ministries or agencies are thinking of the same set of results and objectives. Just one point I wanted to make here in this slide is that one of the issues is that as government begins to open up different industries, it begins to get a splintering of skills, so that in a health ministry you might have a lot of even health professionals, people who have experience with health, who have good health program skills. In your budget department, you have people with accounting skills and the ability to do good preparation of budgets. And in the planning agency, wherever that is, you may in fact, as happens in a lot of companies, have people with good economic skills, strategic skills, with overview of the whole government. That sounds like a proper sort of separation of responsibilities and skills, but the breakdown, if they don't have the same language and think the same way, that's what causes the disconnection that we talked about from starting on Monday, about planning to get disconnected from budgeting, and budgeting to get disconnected from management. Well, you get exactly the same thing. You start pushing out into specialised organisations. They might have this very specialised skill at delivering a program, but do they really understand budgets? Can they prepare budget submissions in a way that holds them accountable in getting funding for their programs? Can they have the skills to understand where they fit in the whole strategic plan? So the specialisation, which is a natural phenomenon that happens as governments get more sophisticated, not only governments, but big companies that become highly specialised, skills, etc. The problem is connection between all the different parts, and that is real energy components that have to happen by itself. So, line industries need to have information systems and management systems and monitoring and accountability systems. It's not only physical systems, it's how they actually manage in their organisations, how they're able to monitor results and pass those results up to higher level management in order to ensure that they're staying on track to achieve the government's goals. So systems in a more general sense are critical. Thinking network will bring all these things together. When decentralised units, ministries or some national governments are properly connected, are informed, are consulted, play a role in contributing to programs and policies and contributing to the elements of the plan, etc. They have what in our jargon, I don't know how translated, it's called buying. They've actually got a stake, if you like. They have a stake in the programs of government, and therefore they improve their understanding of the national programs and their commitment to them, and therefore a sort of commitment to pursue the strategic goals. Left to themselves, here's your program, here's your money, here's your responsibility, we'll talk to you next year. They will drift apart. They must connect with someone discussing what the national objectives are, how they're going, whether there are problems. I remember when I was a Director General myself, I just ran one ministry and I didn't have any sense of how we meetings that we have once a month, all director generals or secretaries come together as a critical place that we could connect and see what the strategy was, how were we going, what were the government's problems, how could we contribute. When I raised that in one of these meetings, the chair, the most senior of all the director generals, just couldn't understand what I was asking, and he just took to talk. To me, it was the opposite of what should have been done. Because what I was seeking is what I'm telling you now. How do I know that I'm contributing to the collective goal? And I don't need to do that by constantly being renewed in my information and connected to the whole network. So I say that with some passion, that if you let ministries or other parts of your government system run quietly over in their own world, they'll probably do a good job, but it'll be an isolated job. They'll be re-stitched in to the fabric of government all the time. Does that make sense? I don't know how you feel. A lot of people in their jobs feel absolutely isolated. Their bosses don't particularly talk to them. They don't know what their ministry is doing. So they can't see the big picture. If you can't, how do you know how to put all that professional work? Go back to my story. I think I told one day that I just literally go for a walk with my boss when I was in the next department. And so they have to tell me what I was supposed to be doing. I mean, I give the detail, and that's not the why. If I'm ashamed of what I'm doing. And that's true of ministries, it's true of all components of government that they decentralize. Okay, now you probably thought that running a government with ministries and etc. is not decentralizing that all one government, but as I hope I've explained, there are a lot of aspects of decentralization that need active management even within single governments. But we're now going to talk about decentralisation, subnational governments, and not surprisingly, that's a much harder exercise. It's actually quite a common phenomenon to have multi-level governments. There can be up to, as I said, China only has 4 levels. It's not national. You've got government serving delivery that's right down to towns, provinces, regions, etc. And that's not uncommon in other countries to have 2, 3, or 4 levels of subnational government. And big governments are not just ministries, they have their own government systems. They have their own ministers probably, or some form of executive. Sometimes they have their own parliament, sometimes not, councils, whatever they might be. But as separate governments, they do have their own governmental system and their own authority and their own accountability back through their own systems. Now, there are quite a lot of different models where subnational governments exist, and those different models affect the way you're able to keep control of the results of labor and national investment. I've mentioned 3 different models here in the last 3 plots on this slide. The first one is one like Australia, which is actually constitutional. Our states, as the first level of subnational government, are not only legally distinct, they are sovereign. They're like their countries. They can't be overruled by central government. They can't be abolished by central government. They are, though, limited in what they can do by the Constitution. The Constitution says central government can do those things and everything else is the state government. So they are very powerful on paper. Can you guess why it's not very powerful at all? The central government is probably nothing. Not by law, just by practice. They collect much more of the money than the states do. And when you hold this purse, and you say, well, I'll give you some money, but only with streets of cash, you can control subnational governments. So what I'm getting at is that the legal framework might be different in different countries, but it may not be the determining factor of whether you can control what you can send. So constitutional federations, and there are lots of them, USA, Germany, Canada, Australia, Brazil, and there are others, they have states or provinces, whatever they call it, that have quite a lot of autonomy and different sorts of relationships with the sector constitutional systems, such as in Indonesia. And in Indonesia, which is a very interesting example, especially of decentralization and trying to maintain a national agenda, their provinces are defined in the Constitution. It defines them, and then the national government itself, or the national parliament, determines what it mandates activities that those provinces must carry out, what their powers and responsibilities are. So they are defined in the Constitution. They exist. Government control really comes from the centre. That's different from the Australian model. But probably the most common model is the last one, more control from the centre. They're very different models of how national governments relate to subnational governments. The common model of how responsibility is distributed between levels of government is what I described on the slide here, that usually the national government is responsible for those national things, events, foreign relations, currency, customs, etc., macroeconomy, market regulation. They're all things I can think of that are commonly given to the central government because they affect the whole nation and you want consistency and you want where they represent, where the nation is actually representing itself in this nation. Subnational governments, on the other hand, are generally responsible for a lot of those top services, especially services that affect people directly. Education, transport, housing, police, municipal services, or actually they're very important. I didn't mention and should have would be local economic development, which is very important to the plans that most countries represent here. But that's not a very clean separation, because you can think of lots of examples where in a single area of policy, both the national government and the subnational governments have an interest. Economic development is one of those. A national plan, your national, I've read, I was sent a national plan by thank you very much for that. A national plan can be very much trying to establish strategic industries for national productivity, for trade, those sort of things. But a local government might be interested in trying to develop industries in their local region in order to stimulate some economic activity. Often programs can have a national interest and a local interest. Education is a good one. Education is pretty much a local activity in many countries, but countries collectively have a desire, a need to make sure that their whole country is educated. So their strategic plan will put a lot of emphasis on educational levels across the whole country. And they may well have a common curriculum across the whole country. So they overlay onto the state and some national governments their requirements for a national plan and override, if you like, what policy might be in some national government. One of the things about subnational governments, SMGs, subnational governments, is that because they provide a lot of those immediate programs of health, education, police, etc., they are under enormous pressure because there's always an increasing demand for those programs. So subnational governments find themselves financially really pressed to do what's locally important, and therefore they might divert their attention away from what is seen to be the national objective. Probably the most powerful issue that affects subnational governments is their financial capacity. How much revenue do they raise? Are they independent? Have they got enough capacity to run their own show? In some countries, yes. In the United States, the individual states actually collect virtually all the revenue they need to run their programs. So that's not true in Australia. I don't know what's the story in your countries. In Australia, the state governments, even though they have huge amounts of programs to deliver, only collect about half the revenue they need. So they rely on the central government. And when you rely on the central government to give you revenue, you become under obligation to that central government. The central government can use that revenue to enforce its policies. That's what happens in many countries. Usually revenue is passed to subnational governments in two different ways. Indonesia does this, Australia does this, many countries do this. One way is to give a lump of money with what's called no strings attached. It's just revenue to subnational government. So a large component of what the central government collects as taxes will be passed to subnational to build up their revenue capacity and then do more things. But they do what their own budget and their own government determines. The other type of money that's passed to subnational governments is called specific purpose payments in Australia, or conditional grants. Money that's given to subnational governments in order to deliver something the national government wants. And that's how they exercise their control. programs according to the national government's requirements. And the method by which that's done can be the critical lever by which the national governments are able to enforce an accountability framework or a results framework. Let me give you some examples, and these are the sorts of ways you may look at in your own countries about how this is done. One way that Australia has delivered money, conditional grants to its subnational governments, is to be very controlling. So education grants would pass from the central government education ministry to the state government education ministries with lots of input. You will spend this money this way. You will implement so many increases in classrooms, so many places in universities, whatever it might have been. And states have no flexibility. They use the money as an instruction from the centre. It's kind of a decentralised model where they're not really decentralised. And it causes a lot of friction, a lot of resistance from state governments to be controlled like that. They are autonomous, they have their own ministers, they have their own parliaments, and they don't like being controlled from the centre. But that was a way the central government thought it could maintain the states implementing what their national goals were. But the biggest problem that came up from that is that the state can say, yes, we'll do that, but they have to then monitor the results and report it back to the centre to show they're doing it. And that was by far the biggest problem. The states, the big arguments were about policy. Yeah, right, we'll do what you want. It wasn't always about money. They would negotiate money. The biggest argument was, we have to collect on your behalf huge amounts of information in the way that you have set out, the variables you have set out, and we don't want to do that. Or if we do it, we don't do it accurately. And that meant that the central government really had no control. You couldn't ensure that the state government would implement this program because it wasn't getting the right information. The accountability broke down. And that's pretty common practice in a lot of countries, especially in mine, but in a lot of countries. So, what's a better model? What's another way you might do it? Well, recently Australia's tried another model. It's pretty early, but I don't think it's going to work either. It's tried a method of saying, all right, we'll agree on the court policy, we'll agree on the money, we the centre will take away a lot of those rules, give you much more freedom to decide how you're going to do it, but we're going to hold you accountable at the end for outcomes. After 2 years, 3 years, to make sure that you have achieved the agreed results that you the centre and the subnational government have agreed, and you're held politically accountable. Well, as I said, we haven't probably gone far enough to be able to test that, but all the early signs are there's not going to be accountability that way either. It really is very difficult when you have a separate government level to ensure that they will do the centre requirements. So I'm going to talk about a third model. We've done this, we've tried everything. One day we might find something that will work. But this is important. This one's got an important principle underneath it. It shouldn't be contentious. What are we talking about? When national government is giving some national government money for health, or for education, or for economic development, isn't it all about the national objectives? We're not talking about different countries in some sort of conflict. We're talking about one country, hopefully, all agreeing on what the goals are of the country, and therefore all contributing in their own way with an agreed set of policy. So the idea of formal consultation and reaching consensus is important element, no matter what the model of accountability is. It goes back to my point before about communicate all the time on discussing the issues. So we've set up a thing in Australia, different models all over the world, called the Council of Australian Governments. And all the heads of government come together at the national and subnational, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year, and debate the big issues for the country and agree on policies and agree on money that will pass from the centre to the subnational governments to achieve the national goals. What goes along with the consultation see if they are implementing according to their own agreement, the agreement they signed themselves. And they put out very strong reports through the year, very public, to expose what's happening. And it's put a lot of political pressure on to the states and the national governments, both ways, to implement what they've agreed to implement. And in a way, it's become the most successful of models. Trying to control the inputs to the work, trying to hold the states accountable for outcomes, very questionable. But doing this public exposure, expert analysis of whether they're being like a review. It's not of the intensity of a program evaluation. It's like an external expert review of progress in the reform. And it's actually the one area where I think we're getting a little bit of traction, getting some results in trying to have the states implement that program. You get a lot of, the more you try to control from the centre, you start to get a lot of perverse behaviour. We've mentioned this in a couple of accounts before, but one sort of perverse behaviour we get in Australia, and it comes really from a bad design of programs, is that there's an incentive on each level of government to try to pass the costs to the other level of government. And it comes from just bad design. And let me give you an example of how it's happened in Australia. It wasn't anticipated. It shows the ingenuity of people when they're desperate to sort of get more money or reduce their costs. Our primary health care, we have a whole network of private doctors, we have a large system of primary health care, and every Australian citizen has subsidised. And when I go to the medical practitioner, most of the people of the government thank you very much taxpayer. So I'm used to that. And the federal government, the national government pays for that. So I go to a doctor, the fee is $80, and it could be $50 paid by the central government. It's common to central government. However, one weekend I had to go to the hospital. And I was hospital system. The hospital system is run by the subnational system. And if they treated me, my arm, whatever it was, the state government paid for it. But I'd arrive there, there's a huge queue, I'm going to wait here for 24 hours to get the service. So they say, well, we have private doctors down the corridor that you can go and see, they're here on weekends. So I go and see the private doctor, I get much bigger service. Who pays for it? See, it looks like that service, it probably is that service, but the point of it, and the state governments, the national governments have organised their hospitals to do this, they're pushing the cost back off the central government. And they're straight for that cost shift. And it's very common. And it sort of undermines the original logic of the program. So there are a lot of channels by which that can happen. Central governments can lose control of what they thought they were going to achieve through having a subnational government within the program if they design those programs now. I think I'd like at this point to give a little bit of an example of what happened in Indonesia, because I know a lot more about this than I do. But both of them, she's had a lot more contact with Indonesia than I had. But when we talk about decentralisation of subnational governments, Indonesia produces a really interesting example. They decentralised by a decision of the central government all at once. I mean, normally this is done over many, many decades of slowly, careful design transmission, but in a very short period of time, they sent a large part of government activity from Jakarta, from the capital, the central government, out to the subnational level. And there are a lot of issues about this. One issue is they went to the regional level. And there are hundreds of regions, not 20 or something like that. So they quickly distributed health, education, roads, transport, all sorts of things out to hundreds of regional governments that up to that point had only done very local things. Now, how did they do it? Obviously, they couldn't. One of the things that happened was that they had a large staff in the central government in Jakarta with skills, with experience. And those staff were sent out to become employees of the regions in order to establish the capacity of those regions to be able to do the government. And their salaries went with them. In other words, the central government had to pass a large amount of money out to the regions to pay for the administration that they have now established. That's one element of their activity. here from what I've been describing, that the problems of trying to maintain control over the results of the central government wants is not just a matter of having some good system that's diagram on a piece of paper, a law. It's people. It's the fact that people have to communicate with others. They have loyalties. They have political accountabilities. We set up some national governments. They're not ministries, they're governments. They have their own political accountabilities that are local. And they're not necessarily going to hold themselves accountable to the central government unless those accountabilities can be aligned with our people. Now, one of the things Indonesia did was it could have decentralized to its first state subnational government, which were policy. They're only about 2030 of those. That would be the logic. But they worried that the provinces were powerful. They were quite powerful subnational governments. And that therefore they would have their own agenda and probably resist implementing what Jakarta wanted to consider. So why? And then the next level. Why? Because they, that next level were much more dependent on the central government for resources. They didn't have such strong political system themselves. So the central government was smart in recognising that if it was going to retain some control over its gender, it would have to go out to the next level of government. The problem was, of course, now they've got 400 or something that they have to communicate with, try to get management information out. So let me mention a third example from Indonesia. They're doing a lot of work to set up performance programs, set up statements of performance for individual programs that can test how well the regional governments are operating as governments and how well they're implementing programs that are important to the states, which are central to the national government. And some of those accountability systems have been tested by external researchers. And they've found some interesting things. They've found that accountability isn't something you can just pass down from one level of health to another if it doesn't fit the local culture, if it doesn't fit the local politics. It might work in Jakarta, but it's not working out there in hundreds of regions. What one study found was that the region that she studied, they were happy to do some parts of accountability. They were happy to publish reports. So transparency by the elements of accountability, that worked. But other levels of accountability are to hold themselves accountable and actually confront, someone who's going to question the parliament or whatever and say, can you explain to me why you did that and how you didn't achieve that result? That was against their culture. They answered to their local political powers, not to Jakarta. And therefore that element of accountability broke down. It wasn't accountable with the way the local government operated. So you can't just pick up a system that works in your capital city and put it out for some national government. I think it's going to give you the right information to have control. It's not local negotiated, it's got to be consistent and accountable with the way the some national governments work. There's another anecdote, it's an anecdote that comes from an actual study that relates to how central governments and subnational governments operate together. It happened in Uganda, in Africa, and apparently in Uganda they had a policy where they were trying to raise the level of primary school education quite quickly, and they committed a lot of their national government's funds out to villages and towns throughout the country with instructions about building up primary school education. After a period of time, they started testing whether primary school education was improving, whether more people were achieving primary school results, etc. And they found that they were getting no improvement. They did it again the next year, no improvement. They didn't know why. They were getting such little information back that they couldn't tell why. All they could tell was that they tested the students, they were not getting any improvement. So they put in place what is now becoming reasonably common, especially in Africa, at one point where it may be happening in other countries. It's a process called a public expenditure tracking review. It means exactly what it says. It means someone goes in and actually follows the money. You send money to so-and-so in a subnational government, I'll go talk to them, what they do with it, and trace where the money went. What they found at the end of this study was that nearly 3/4 of what had been sent to the local governments to handle primary education didn't go into primary education. control of it. They could have imposed some kind of legal sanction, I don't know, put some people in jail or something, but they didn't do that. They published the reports, they made them available to the press, newspapers, and they embarrassed the local governments. And the people in those towns suddenly found that the local governments had received a lot of money and they had got better education. So they got angry. So local politics held their local governments accountable. The change wasn't legal, it wasn't administrative, it was about public accountability. And what happened after another 2 or 3 years? Now 70% of the money was going into primary education. Still not 100, but it was a lot better than 30. And they were getting results. I guess the message is that you can trust the subnational government, but you still going to have very strong methods of being able to monitor what is happening in those areas, of having them properly and reliably accountable, of having external people able to audit and find out what's happening in subnational governments, and to have public accountability. They were the elements that went in there in Uganda. And don't you go to Uganda, Australia has done some similar things. For example, we talked yesterday about Supreme Auditor institutions, Auditor General, whatever you call them in your country. In Australia, only in the last year, we have changed a very important principle. We've always worked on a principle that the auditor, the chief auditor for the central government, could only look at central government. And the chief auditor for a state government could only look at state government. They all look at each other. But as a result of national legislation passed in the last year, the central auditor, the national government auditor, can now have power to go in and look at a state government's use of central government funds. So if I'm a central government and I give a state government $1 million to do a particular program, the Auditor General in the Commonwealth under the national government can go to that state government and inquire and look at their books and see what they do with it, because they're using funds that are the responsibility of the national government and the central government's accountable to its own political constituency. I don't know how it's going to work yet, it's never been used yet, but you can see the point of it. It's trying to make sure that the central government has a more direct method of having external scrutiny and our subnational governments using funds. So there are lots of different techniques. So I think the concluding comment I would say is that the last episode has said that there are lots of different techniques, and why lots of different techniques, because really it's very hard to get them to work well. By definition, the subnational government has a certain degree of autonomy. If it didn't, it would be part of the national government. And therefore, you've got to kind of break through that. You've got a way of making sure that you're getting results back, getting accurate, qualitative information, that you're getting accountability. But by far the most effective, if not a method, certainly an atmosphere, an environment we have to create between the national governments and subnational governments is through having a formalised process of consultation, discussion, working out the problems, and building a consensus between those levels of government, not only about how they operate, but more importantly, about what are the common national objectives that are trying to be through results. Back to that phrase is the whole substance of this workshop. How does that results framework get agreed between the levels of government so that it will be effective at those levels? That's the challenge. So I presume that all of the countries have successfully implemented this method of passing the subnational governments and get results. Which countries here have actually states or provinces or something with separate government systems? Do any of the countries here have separate government systems running the single government? Local government. So your local government would be sort of part of, set up by the central government. Yeah. So that's like Great Britain. And the central government passes money for local governments. Do you want to say something about how you hold the capital or not? I'll get you a much later. So now you're telling me that in Georgia, They have a system that I describe as being like the United Kingdom, where there are local governments that do some delivery below that are set up on national government. What I'm asking her is, what I'm asking is whether she can tell me about anything to do with how the national government holds the local governments accountable. Very similar to Great Britain. Yeah, so that's an example of my third category, a non-constitutional set of subnational governments, I think. Whereas the more autonomy and political independence subnational governments have, it's not going to be more sophisticated and complicated about the way you try to get them to agree. Does it work well for you? You feel comfortable as a person in central government that central government knows what's happening in the regions?
No, I guess have more power and they do monitor all the premises in the country, the local governments,
And can you say that they are contributing to a strategic objective of government, or they don't do what they're told, or they have?
I think that maybe they don't understand the details, but not details, but priorities and all goals and what the state should achieve, but they understand what they should do, and in their line, so in local government, they have some functions and they know what to do. They don't understand what the state government means to achieve that goal, or do some priorities, or make some work.
Does the central government actually discuss the national plans with the regional funders when they're forming a policy in place? Are there national conferences or something like that where local government
with the state government what to do and how to achieve. Yeah, there are some relationships, interactions.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that you contributed that information. It's a good example in one of the countries here about how one can talk about works. It sounds like it might work better than it does in my country. Why don't we, we've got just a few minutes left. I've got the time table. We're supposed to go to 10:45, and see where I'm going to go for everything. So why don't all right, look, I just look at the program. The tea break after another half an hour, and actually sort of completes my part of the workshop before Joseph Caputo is going to be speaking to you. So before I get on to some other issues of summarising some of my points from the whole workshop that I've been contributing to, I'd just like to open up to questions and especially examples. Georgia, if anyone's got other examples about how you operate, how decentralisation in your countries may create issues for you or how you solve them. I'd be very interested to hear from our friends, the people of the Republic of China, because that's got one of the most interesting subnational government decentralisations. As I said before, they pass down through very large provinces like Xinjiang and down to cities and towns and to local delivery, and of course the national government sitting in Beijing set up a quite an elaborate plan, which we discussed the other day. They spent two years developing it with lots of consultation and coordination between different levels of government and political parties. So we have the high level plan. It now transits down through the sequence of the subnational governments. I'm just wondering about whether any of the people from Xinjiang here can perhaps contribute to the discussion of how that accountability operates in your country and how a results framework and the things we've been talking about works.
那好吧，我把我们这个中国的这个财政的这个分析的情况给大家做一个介绍。我们中国的这个政府呢是分了5级，那么相应的这个财政管理呢也是分了5级。从大的框上讲呢是中央和地方2级，那么地方呢又分了4级，就是省级、地级、县市级和乡镇级。当然，在这5级里面呢，地级和乡镇级的它的一些政府职能或者说是财政管理职能是弱化的，因为这个从我们近几年的财政改革来讲呢，是采取了一个所谓的省直管线和这个乡财县管。那么这2个这个改革的推动呢，就是要弱化这个就是地级，也就是所谓这5级层次里面的第3级。另外呢，就是弱化乡级，也就是5级层次里面的第5级。这个可能这个从中央政府的这个改革的这个目标呢，可能就是要推动将来的这个中国的财政管理体制，或者叫政府的这个管理体制呢，由现在的这个5级的现状变成了未来的3级的现状，减少这个中间的架构，也就是所谓的刚才戴维教授说的那种这个原来的那种长条状的这种管理向扁平化管理的这种改革和过渡在这个中央和地方的这种分级管理中呢，应该说是一种相对集权的一个管理体制。因为呢，这个中央政府目前呢，它的这个财政收入占到了全国财政收入的50%以上。也就是说呢，中央是通过这个分税制的这种体制，把大部分的税收都集中到了这个中央。它是通过各种转移支付的形式呢，对各个省进行一个补贴。那么这个转移支付呢，主要有2种，一种呢是 我们讲的一般性的转移支付或者叫彩礼性的转移支付。那么这种转移支付呢，它是没有确定的项目的，而是以一些因素呢来进行分配。这个资金转移到地方以后，由地方呢来根据地方的这个社会经济发展情况呢，来对资金呢进行一个资源的再分配。那么还有一种转移支付呢，就是叫专项转移支付。那么这种呢实际上是一种项目转移，所有的这个转移补贴资金呢是有确定的项目和这个补贴的对象的。那么也就是说呢，在这个总体来讲，各地呢它有自己的这个政府，有自己的人民代表大会，它对各级的这个财政收入和支出的这种分配呢有一定的自主权，但是呢，这个因为尤其像新疆这样的地区呢，我们的这个60%以上的财政这个收入财力呢是来源于中央补贴的，所以我们对中央的依赖程度是非常大的。那么中央对地方的这种这个支出的监测呢，它有多方面的，有政治方面的、政策方面的，同时呢，财政部它也有专门的这个监督机构，会派驻到各省，对中央分配下来的资金呢进行一个追踪和监测。谢谢。
Thank you very much. That's most interesting. I'm very interested to hear that China is sort of moving to a flatter structure. That often happens in large enterprises too, but China is probably one of the largest enterprises in the world, so I can understand why they're moving to flatter structures. But what I'd like to do before we go a little further is how the accountability works. So you talked about money going down. I want to know about the information and the accountability coming back up. But just before I ask you to comment, or one of your colleagues, I don't mind who's got the information, just give you an example, yet another one from Indonesia, that I explained how in Indonesia the responsibility program has been set out in the regions. The question is who is able to see whether the regions are doing what they need to do, not just, I don't mean wasting the money or stealing it, but actually putting it in place effectively so that the results coming out, there is better education, better health, and all sorts of things. In Indonesia, the regions that fit within the province, the provincial governor has a role in holding the regions in his province accountable and feeds that back to Jakarta, to the central government. What I'm not clear about in China is if there's, say, the national plan, I've read much of the national plan, there's a lot of emphasis on education for all sorts of purposes. Let's say that's distributed down, and then right down to the lowest level, the schools are being implemented and built with teachers trained, etc. What level does it become apparent that the education system is not being effective, not getting results, and therefore one has to have a negative policy? But what level are they held accountable? That's what I'm still not sure about. Can you answer that?
这个从这个政府管理方面呢，它是对有一个政府领导的问责制，就是说如果说这个国家的一些计划没能达到这个相应目标的话，我们在中国有一些强大的政策，比如说所谓的一票否决制，比如说对于行政长官一些指标，就是上级政府下达的指标不能完成的话，他的职务可能就没有了。就说只要有一票没有通过，就说有一项任务没有完成，那么你的这个就说你的所有任务都会被否定的。这是从行政问责，这是一个角度。另外呢，就是上级对下级的监督。那么像我们的教育支出这一块呢，我们有一个法定增长，就是我们中国呢目前有像教育、科技，就是教育投入、科技投入，还有农业的投入，都是有法定的这个增长比例的。那教育呢是要占到 GDP 的4%，如果达不到这个呢，也会对行政长官进行问责。这是从法律角度进行一个确定。那么同时呢，像财政部，它驻到各省呢有一个叫财政部驻这个各省的一个财政部的专员办事处。那么这些人呢，他的这个身份呢是属于财政部的，他们是专门对中央给到各地的这个各项支出的情况、支出的效果进行一个问责。谢谢。
That's very interesting. My perception of that, trying to put into the framework I've been talking about, is that that's very much an outputs sort of control monitoring, people with targets, and they have to achieve certain results. Another level, which is much harder to make work, is at a higher level, where people might be achieving their budget results and targets, but it's not working because it wasn't the policy. The strategy was wrong or something, and that has been monitored. That's getting into the issue of program review, even evaluation. That has to be monitored at higher levels as well. So you might be getting outputs that are the outcomes being achieved. And that might not be because people have failed in their own targets. It might be a more systemic problem that is equally effective and related to more important that's monitored. And there's a good method of measuring it and an ability to respond to shift. It's a bit like Fazan's example that terrific schools, teacher training, everything could be put in place, but people couldn't get the school in place. And that was recognised. And when it was recognised, policy had to be shifted, the resources had to be shifted. So the outcomes have to be monitored just as much as the outputs. And sometimes there's a harder one to monitor and a harder one to correct. Very interested in any other examples or observations or questions?
So I think one of the challenges that faces countries that are just starting to decentralize is that, how many sets of rules do you have? How do you control by rules or do you control by consensus? And what David talked about, that Australia is I guess, I would have to use the word, I guess, more sophisticated in its financial management. They've tried to move away from rules and realize that they have to move by consensus. And that's why the central government has meetings with regional governments and tries to convince them that, this policy is a good idea for Australia and therefore you should do it. Other than that, it's very difficult to control subnational governments, which are in fact, in many cases elected. But in developing countries, where a lot of us are embarking on decentralization and still experimenting with it, the debate is all about what kind of rules one should have, and that's one of the things that we've observed. On the issue of what do you make people accountable for, outputs or outcomes, it seems that you have to stick at the initial level to accountability and outputs, because that's something that is directly related to your action. Whether or not outcomes were achieved, it's a question, as you said correctly, it's something that has to perhaps be discussed at a different level, and perhaps not so much linked to accountability, because when it starts to come to outcomes, so many players are involved that you just can't punish everybody. But at the same time, the people who are in a position to make the decisions that these are the outputs that should have been taken to achieve the outcomes are the ones who should think about that relationship. So the relationship between outputs and outcomes is something, the dialogue that happens at a different level. And once that relationship is more or less decided, then the focus has to be on delivering outputs. That seems to be one of the thinkings. And we shouldn't confuse accountability of outcomes and accountability of outputs. Am I talking complete rubbish, or do people, does that make sense? That's just an opinion I came from all our discussions.
I'll talk about it in a moment, but I'd like to use the next few minutes if anybody wants to ask questions or make comments. Please, this is an opportunity. You're not able to ask what's for lunch, but anything else pretty much we're able to ask. No questions? Anybody has to be perfectly. Okay. If you have questions during the next few minutes, while I'm just going to do a bit of a summary. theme right through all of this, even though we've talked about a huge range of things, the theme all the way through has been about the results framework. How does this, we all know how to work in government, we've worked for many years, we've been very busy, we've done an enormous number of things, but we've really had the opportunity, because it's not done very well anywhere, to operate within a structured results framework where everything we do and all our colleagues do is brought together in a structured way and achieve results. And that's what is being pursued in the discussions of this workshop. Now, when Azana gave you her frequent diagram of all the parts of the processes of government and management and how they connect, she had lots of arrows, everything had to interact with everything. And really, the biggest problem is most of those arrows are broken. People don't connect. And one thing that she said that's effective, that's brought into effect by having all those connections around that diagram, is that there is one set of results. I can't exact word she used, which was talking about the fact that it's all one system, one set of results. When I described it to you, I unpicked that a little bit, and I talked about different sorts of ways we express results. And those different ways that the results are expressed come about because people throughout the system have very different roles. They're at a very high strategic level, ministry management level, program management level, or very much an operational role of putting things into place day to day. And all of those people see the process of government differently, and they see their part in the whole system differently. And the way they measure results or observe results are different, and you expect it to be different. So where's this oneness that Azana is talking about? That's the whole challenge. How do all of these different perspectives on results at all the different levels of government come together in a consistent, single framework? Consistent, single framework. I'm surprised how easy it is to say those three words, because to make that work is very, very difficult. And that's what we've been talking about. How do these goals from the strategic level, through policies, through programs, down to the level of implementation, have a consistent set of measures? This is partly what I was speaking to our friend from Jenny here, that she pointed out how people are held very immediately accountable for the tasks they're given, for the outputs. But that is not going to guarantee that the strategic objectives are going to be met in any of the assumptions, the policy assumptions, the logic that goes from the day-to-day management to the top strategic, where that all connects in a logical way. And that doesn't happen by itself. It happens by very active intervention, by very active management at the strategic level, at the program level, at the policy level, and at the day-to-day management level. And therefore, we have people who will manage according to outputs, people who will manage according to outcomes, people who will manage according to whatever the word might be, impacts or strategic goals at the top level. And the monitoring and accountability has to reflect that description, has to reflect that cascading down from the strategic to the operational. And it has to work backwards. Responsibility and accountability for outputs has to be monitored at a higher level that's coming together into outcomes that the and outputs to the strategic goal. I used the word control yesterday in one of my talks. Not financial control to come in, but control of an organisation in being able to make sure it's achieving what it's set out to achieve, of checking, of being able to measure the path it's going down, to see whether external shocks or poor management internally or whatever it might be is driving them off the path. Can they bring it back onto the path? Can they achieve the result? That's another level of control and management and accountability. It may not be just at an outcome level, it may be too regimented about this. I'll give you an example of that. I think I told you that I had an example yesterday that if a person education, and part of the educational success depended on effective transport. That transport might be run by the education department, if that's the way the government decides to go. Or it might be run by the transport department, if that's the way the government decides to go. But that doesn't make any difference. They've got to come together and succeed together for the result be achieved. But the problem is, we introduce a new channel here to decentralization. Education is not going to work unless the transport works for it, right? But the transport can't run a ministry. They've got their own worry about national rail systems, etc. They have school buses, that's just a nuisance. It isn't their priority. The education ministry is absolutely critical. So they have to have a mechanism of making sure that the various parts of government that contribute to their results are delivering what they need. So you see why even decentralization can make such a big difference in the capacity of a manager to achieve results. But it's not good enough for education people to say, oh, well, that's transport's problem. I'll blame them. They're accountable for the education results. They've got to go and negotiate with the transport people and make sure it works. They've got to make sure they've got the money for it. That's part of the problem. You see my point? That just giving a whole lot of people tasks and checking that they're delivering their outputs isn't necessarily enough. In fact, it's never enough. It's got to be monitored at multiple levels in the whole system. There are three obvious levels. One's the output level, and that's the day-to-day ensuring that people meet targets, meeting the KPIs, putting in place everything's unfortunately is running up. But an example here is gone now, but it was about the stimulating agriculture and using a whole lot of methods. The output level for him would have been the people who run, say, the loan system, or ensure that there's equipment to be leased to the farmers. And if they didn't ensure that that contract was fulfilled, and the tractors were on his flail, and their output has not been reached. That's one level. That's the immediate operational level. But then at the higher level, we come to sort of the outcomes for that. The outcomes, depending how you structure it, probably was being that agricultural growth target, production target, something like the figures you use, you aim for so many million tons by 2030 or something. Even if everybody put in place the loans and the other methods, there may have been a problem. It might have been that there was some environmental degradation of the land years ago, and we should have been addressing that. And we can't increase the productivity of the land. That has to be monitored at a program level. Is the outcome being achieved? Can we have a sort of a scrutiny of why we're not achieving the agricultural target? It may not be because of the poor performance at the output level. So that's the second level, is that program. Are we achieving our outcomes? The third level would always be a whole of government at the high level. The cabinet would be meeting, and the Minister for Agriculture would be reporting, and the Minister for Trade and various ministers who are concerned may be saying, well, we're moving towards self-sufficiency in food, but we're behind in our schedule. We don't think we're going to get there for at least another 3 years or whatever. That was the strategic goal, self-sufficiency in food. That's the idea. So I can see immediately three important levels that effective monitoring and accountability has to take place if the results coming with this going to come to fruition. Outputs, the day-to-day management, outcomes at the program level, and that's probably something to monitor at least on an annual basis, if not more frequently, the outcomes. The strategic may be monitored every 3 years or something like that, but it's just as important, and it would be done at much more a collective level. It could be that the production was great, it was all methods targets, but it was left sitting in sheds because the railways weren't working or they were water, and they lost it, and weren't self-sufficient. It was someone else's complete problem. But for the whole of government, they have to make sure it comes to fruition. So we've talked about the planning into budgeting, and of course budgeting, that's another critical element in there, and the purpose of the budgeting is to make sure that when the money is the very scarce resources allocated every year, that they are allocated on the basis of programs that are actually producing results. Now that's an obvious statement, but it means every proposal that comes to the budget has to be evaluated in terms of infinite limits into the results plan. So every part, other governments, if decentralized, all have to be linked into the results plan. And that is actually difficult. It is costly. It takes resources. It takes people who are specialised in handling those accountabilities. And then it takes a specialised system for being able to bring those accountabilities back to government so they can correct the path and change the policy or make sure there's more transport or do whatever is needed. And that, in a way, is whole of government control, using the same word again. You can have control at the detail level, control at the program level, control at the ministry level, but you can have control at the whole government level. You're not achieving the result. Of course, we have a problem. Of course, the exchange rate has changed policy norms. You've got to change that direction. That's control of the programs and policies to achieve results. And to go right back to Monday morning, this whole thing is a great big complex system. Every part is critical in making it work. So the results planning is like a nerve center. We must right through it. And if it breaks down, the organism breaks down. And that's something I might stop. Questions or comments I'm interested in, otherwise we'll wait to see if anyone else wants to speak or make comments.
Well, thank you very much, David. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank David for his time here and his imparting his knowledge to us. David comes with a lot of experience with the Australian government system, and of course he extensively lectured in Australia about various aspects of government management of government. So thank you very much, David. Let's people give him a good round of applause.
I wish you all a lot of luck with your exercises because you've got a lot of challenges facing you. As I said, I only hope that once or twice over a period of the next year or so you would say, I know an idea here, I heard that from David back. And if that happens, I'm very happy. Thank you.